Revolutionized, episode 15. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to take a little break from the interviews we've done lately and do a solo show today on my favorite tools, mostly technology tools, that I use in running my practice or that I've seen others use, and help give you a sense of what kind of things you maybe have access to that you don't have access to now, or maybe you do. Several of these can be used in an employee setting, but I guess the background for why I wanted to do this is before I came to the independent space, I was more of a late adopter from a technology perspective. I did not like change necessarily, even for a fairly young guy at the time. I just liked if something was working, I would keep using it, and I didn't necessarily the need for newfangled things like that iPhone that came out. In fact, I got my first BlackBerry in late 2009 after I went independent because it seemed pretty cool, the idea of having email, not at a desk. So that was, I joke now in terms of the cycle, that was probably the death knell for BlackBerry. I was probably the last possible person to adopt that platform, and so therefore it was done once I had bought in. But after I went independent, I found myself, BlackBerry is a very simple example. It was certainly an improvement over the flip phone I had at the time. I was more interested in what was available because I could control my environment a lot more. So if I wanted to have an office in one location and be able to work from another location at times, whether that was home or another office closer to my house, I wanted to have that capability to have, be connected, have access. And at an employee firm, especially in 2009, and probably to a large degree today, you're limited in what you can use to streamline your practice and, more importantly, make your life more efficient, not your business. In my mind, your business is there to support your life, not the other way around. So, I come at this from a bit of a late adopter mindset when I started, but as I've kind of dove headfirst in the last several years into different tools, I've enjoyed it. So I've kind of explored different software, and I want to share some of my favorite stuff that has helped me run my business and help me grow things, help me kind of set up my business around my life instead of vice versa. So these will be in no particular order, and that's on purpose. If I tried to give these rank orders, I probably would never get around to recording this episode. So first, let me talk about one of the big things this has helped me do. I've just alluded to it, but I've had remote assistance for the whole 6.5 years I've been independent so far. So in other words, I have not sat in an office next to an assistant that whole time, but I've always had an assistant, not necessarily a dedicated one just for me. Part of that time on purpose, part of that time because I was just growing the business early on and didn't want to need a full-time person just for me. So a lot of these tools have facilitated having an assistant that doesn't sit in the same location as I do. Same thing goes for business partners. I have 2 business partners in the group of advisors that we provide compliance and other support for, and I have a couple other business partners in our practice. So, and none of us spend every day in the same office. The first tool that I use daily is Google Voice. It is basically a call routing service. So my main phone number is on the Google Voice platform, and it routes my phone calls to whatever phone line I'm using at the time. So it functions a little bit like a cell phone in giving you some location independence. In other words, you can work from wherever you need to and people can reach you. But it's a little bit more powerful in my mind than just a cell phone number because it gives you the capability to use a landline. For example, at my home office, the cell reception is not very good. I still think there's a benefit to using a landline at this point in time, in 2016. It just sounds, more like a business phone. Maybe that's not a big deal for a lot of clients, but for some people, I think it just comes across better to sound like you're on a quote-unquote business phone, a landline, instead of a cell phone. And again, that might be only for certain people, but I still like the kind of the reliability of a landline. So you can route your calls with Google Voice to a landline in an office, at your home office. Heck, if you're on vacation, I've had it routed to my in-laws' landline. So if someone calls me, I'm talking on a landline wherever I am. It's very easy to use, very powerful, but the main benefit is routing your calls wherever you want to go. Google Voice is one of my very favorite tools. I could probably record a whole episode about its ins and outs, but also allows me to get voicemails via email. So when you get a voicemail, you're not able to, check your messages. You just get an email sent to you. So in fact, I never, quote, check my messages. I just look at my email and it's transcribed. The transcriptions are not perfect. Sometimes they're humorous, but 80 to 90% of the time I can tell who called me and why they called without having to even listen to the message. So Google Voice, you can go to google.com/voice to learn more. There's YouTube videos about how it works, and I think it's a great tool. It's free, very, very useful. And these days you can actually use your existing cell phone number and use the Google Voice feature. So that was not available when I started using it in October of 2009, but I'd probably use that feature if I could now. You could just convert your existing phone number into a Google Voice number and use all the power and functionality of Google Voice. The next tool that I use quite a bit is Google Calendar. So again, another Google product, free. Basically, the search functionality is phenomenal in actually any Google product. But the calendar is I find it very easy to use. It syncs easily with my iPhone. You can sync it to Outlook if you so choose. I try to use Outlook as little as possible. So one of the tools I don't use if I don't have to is Outlook. I don't use the calendar function there. I don't use the task management. I only use email, and that's basically because I'm forced to with our broker-dealer's email server. We have to use Outlook essentially. So anyways, Google Calendar is very easy. It's easy to use. There are a lot of good calendar tools, so I'm not sure this is anything revolutionary. I just find it works well. If I want to search when I met with someone, I can, it pulls up the meetings that are on the calendar. That's very helpful. If I want to see when's the last time I met with someone, a lot of good sharing functionality. Privacy settings are very useful. Easy to share the calendar with others on your team if you use it. I just find it's very, very easy to use from my perspective. Next tool is one that's fairly new for me, but I think has a lot of potential. It's a complement to Google Voice. It's called Ruby Receptionists. Ruby, like R-U-B-Y. Their website is callruby.com. And while Google Voice does a great job of automating your phones being answered, Ruby basically does the opposite. It provides a human, real-life voice to answer the phone and route the call or take a message however you see fit. So it's not free, as you can imagine, with humans answering. But if you have a practice where people like to hear someone's a real-life human on the other end, and I guess that's pretty much all of us. I think some people are more accustomed and comfortable with voicemail than others in terms of the clients. Ruby, basically for $250 a month or so at the low end, will answer your calls and route them to you, and you can give them very detailed instructions and work with them so that they know how you want calls handled, what you want them to say. So they serve as your remote receptionist. And this is an example of, if someone is concerned about the idea of hiring employees and having this office set up, I think you have to, I would encourage you. You don't have to. I would encourage you to look a little bit outside what you know, and the traditional. This person sits up front. They answer the phone. They greet visitors. They do whatever else they do. A lot of those tasks can be either automated or, task oriented, broken up. So, if answering the phone is what's most important to you, making sure your phone gets answered, someone like Ruby will do it, and for $3,000 a year, you've got that task taken care of, versus paying someone who knows how much. If that's only for 10% or less of the cost of a human in your office, you get a human. They're based out in, I believe it's Portland, Oregon, and they've done a great job. So I haven't leveraged them a ton, but I'll be out of town soon for a week, and I'm planning to use them as my answering service. Instead of having all these voicemails have to get returned, I'll just have someone answer the phone and let people know that I'm not available. And I think that'll be a great experience for my clients. So I'm really looking forward to being able to use it in a more concerted fashion. So that's callruby.com. The next tool is, I think these days you should probably consider for your customer relationship management, your CRM, something that's web-based. So that's very broad and generic, but my main point here is, one, I think you really should have some sort of CRM beyond Microsoft Outlook. I know in all the industry surveys, that is a common response, to which the technology police say, that's not a CRM. Stop. That is not a CRM. Which I understand their point. Technically, you can use it to manage your customer relationships. Therefore, I think it can function as a CRM, but I believe they're right. It's not really the main function or purpose of Microsoft Outlook. So, again, I've already expressed my feelings for Outlook, but if you're using that, that's great. I think being organized and make sure you have a system is the main point. But I would recommend looking at the myriad of web-based options out there. There are probably too many choices. I use a very lightweight, simple CRM that's not even industry specific. My main goal is to make sure I have somewhere to record notes and to make sure a record of contacts, and then we've sort of built our own custom fields and organization the way that it's simple to use for both me and probably more importantly my staff, so that we're not spending a lot of time and energy training on a platform. One of my businesses uses Redtail, which is obviously a big one in our industry. I think that's very, very reasonable selection. Personally, I like something even simpler. There's a trade-off there with simplicity. You don't necessarily get as much horsepower. But for now, I've been happy with a kind of a generic solution that has no really training ramp up for staff in particular. If it's just you and you're a techie and you want to dive in, not that Redtail is overly tech, doesn't require a lot of tech savvy to use, but there's more involved than some of the basic ones out there. Obviously, Salesforce is still very common. I know a lot of us find that a bit cumbersome, but my main point is I would recommend something web-based. Don't use something that can only sit on one computer or a server somewhere. The next tool is, believe it or not, is Gmail as an email client with a big asterisk, compliance permitting. So obviously anything of these tools, but in particular email, we need to make sure whoever is in charge of your compliance is comfortable with whatever the security features and the encryption. I've double checked all these tools, and they have the requisite encryption that I mentioned specifically for our situation. But your results may vary. But I used Gmail as my email client for several years to pull in my broker-dealer email. So it was my work at myfirmhere.com, but I used Gmail to pull that in, if that makes sense. So it wasn't a Gmail address. It was through my firm's encrypted server, but I was able to add that address to my Gmail, and it was phenomenal. For about 3 or 4 years, I was able to use that tool. Searchability is amazing. The ease of use of drafting emails for later, in conjunction with Boomerang, which is a tool I'll talk about in just a minute. Able to send emails later. actually set them to be sent at a certain time. The ability to use Gmail's canned responses, which are essentially templates. So if there's an email you write every year about 1099s, or if there's a end of the year email, or a I'm going on vacation email, or whatever you send out more than 2 or 3 times, you can create a template in the canned responses part of Gmail, and it's very, very useful. Unfortunately for me, we migrated to a different kind of server. I'm not an expert, as you can probably tell, but at the end of 2014, I had to go back to lowly Outlook. So that's something I have to deal with, and hope you don't feel too sorry for me. But that was not my favorite day. December 12th, 2014 was kind of a rough day. But we're getting through, and I think we'll be okay. So thank you for your concerns. Boomerang is it's called a plugin for Gmail. So it allows you to do 2 main things. One, the Boomerang name comes from if you have an email that either you've sent or you've received. So it's either your sent items or your inbox, and you want to have a follow-up. Instead of having to create a task somewhere else, you can just easily click a few buttons, and the email will come back to you, i.e. the Boomerang name. It will come back to your inbox at a time you determine. So you can say, hey, put this back in my inbox in 1 day, 2 days, 4 days, a month, or a specific time. And the same thing goes for, like I said, sent items. And you can also have it set, I believe, to come back only if no one responds to it. So if you're sending an email and you want to make sure someone responds, so there's a follow through, you can say, show this back to my inbox, put it back in there in a week only if no one has responded. So it's a pretty slick tool that way. And the other option, the other tool or way it's used is probably the way I used it the most and do use it, is you can send emails, you can schedule them to be sent later. So if I want to remind a client or a fellow advisor that I'm talking to, or I want to deliver some information, but maybe I want to deliver it at just the right time, so it's top of mind, or so instead of sending it 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I send it at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. I can draft the email, a schedule for later, hit send, and it will sit in my outbox basically until it's time to, until the specified time. So I found it very useful, and I really miss being able to use it in Gmail, except when I have a personal email that I'm using my personal account, I can do that. Now, to be fair, Outlook does sort of have this functionality. In fact, Boomerang is available for Outlook, but it's not the same. So, as with everything compared to Gmail, it's not the same. Next tool is Google Hangouts. We use that internally for video calls. Took a couple minutes to figure out how to use it for a team of about 6 of us that use it every few weeks for a video call. Again, it's not overly fancy, but it works. There are a lot of other video call options out there. I've heard good things about one called Zoom, XOOM, but there's any number of choices for video conferencing. So I would say play around with them if you're interested, and if you can't figure it out quickly, move on to the next one. If you get frustrated in particular, there's a lot of choices, so don't feel like you have to be stuck with one. We just find Google Hangouts to be pretty easy to use, and to be honest, just the one we tried and it worked, so we stuck with it. If I was ranking these, this one might be number 1 or 2. The next tool is Dropbox. Basically, Dropbox just allows you to use the cloud, so to speak, for document storage and sharing. Again, this is an example of something that I had never heard of, never had any interest in, but I think my younger brother, who's kind of a techie guy, mentioned it about a month or 2 into my time as an independent advisor, and I started using it and realized this is exactly what I need, because now I can access my notes, my documents from my phone, from my laptop, from my desktop, from a tablet, from wherever another person's computer. If I log into the desktop, the actual web-based version of it, and everything. It's my stuff is attached to me, not attached to and a login, and not attached to a particular device or place. And I think that is, at this point, I highly recommend, if you haven't figured out how to do that, or at least when you go independent, if you decide to do that, great way to be flexible. Again, even if you work from one location all the time or with one computer, it serves as a backup. It's there if you need it. If and when your computer crashes or goes down, and all computers eventually, die. You can also create a local backup if you want to have the data. If you're asking what happens if Dropbox goes down, well, you can create a local backup on your own device or a memory stick or something to make sure you have your data. Having redundancy and backups is obviously a great idea, but I found Dropbox to be phenomenal. Again, working remotely has been a non-issue in terms of the challenges because of tools like Dropbox. The next tool is something that you can use, I think, wherever you are, and that's Genius Scan for iPhone or probably on Android as well. So the Genius Scan is just an app on your phone. I think it costs about $6, and it can scan with your phone's camera to PDF. So a lot of the documents I sign, hard copy, are 1 or 2 pages. It's very easy to print them out, snap a picture, create PDF, email them back to where they came from or where they need to go. So Genius Scan, very easy, very well worth the investment. Sometimes I question how much I even really need a scanner on my printer, in the all-in-one, because I just find it just as easy to use the Genius Scan on the phone. The next tool is the idea of using voice transcription. So I'll give you one particular tool I've used in the past to get there, but there are lots, and there are a lot of ways to get there. I'll get into that later with another discussion, but the tool I've used is speechpad.com. So that's speechpad, P-A-D.com. And essentially it's a service that will take your audio recording and transcribe it. So when I started this podcast, or before I did, I started recording audio and would have SpeechPad transcribe it to text and then post it as a blog. And that's still very useful for me, but in this case I've decided for now I'm going to focus on audio. But in my practice and other situations, text is really the only way to do things. So if you have an idea or a concept that you want to get to someone and it needs to be in writing, but you're not a big fan of writing long or short things, recording a memo essentially and shipping it off to SpeechPad, they will turn it around. They give themselves a week, but even for 15, 20-minute recordings, I've gotten them back fairly within 3 or 4 days. It's $1 a minute, so if you're doing a lot of it, it can add up. But the time saved and energy in writing, if you're not really a writer, is, I think, invaluable. Well, so I know it's valuable because if you look at, if your hourly rate should be $100 an hour or even $50 an hour, and you're paying, the amount of time it would take you to transcribe or write what you can get back fairly quickly and with very little effort on your end, it's a huge benefit. So speechpad.com. But again, there are other transcription tools. That's just one I've used myself. And every phone nowadays has a voice recorder, so you don't need even super fancy audio. You probably don't even need a microphone. You can get one, relatively inexpensively if you want to have a little bit better quality audio. The microphone I'm using right now, I think, was less than $100. But you can do that from a $15 headset from Best Buy or Amazon or wherever headsets are found. The next tool is related to scheduling. It's one that I just started using in the last few weeks. It's called Calendly, so like calendar, but drop the AR and add LY, Calendly. Basically, it's a way to eliminate the back and forth of scheduling an appointment or a call with someone. So you connect it to your calendar, in my case, Google. I'm not sure if I assume that's not the only calendar it can connect to, but the world does seem to default to Google Calendar, Gmail, those sorts of products. So in my case, it connects to my Google Calendar, and I can send a link for a specific event type. If you're paying if you have the paid version for $10 a month, you can create a bunch of different categories. So I have a wholesaler meeting, a wholesaler call, client meeting, podcast interview, all these different categories, and you can determine how long each of those meetings or calls should be, in the defaults. And then each event type has a separate link that you email to the person you're going to meet with or call, and you can add instructions, and basically the person just picks the time from your calendar, and you can add instructions. For example, when I have wholesaler meetings, I have them at the same place all the time. I do them in the mornings, somewhere between 7 and 10 a.m. So I specify, this set of parameters for that kind of meeting. And so when I send a wholesaler that link, they are not going to try to pick and meet with me at 4:30 in the afternoon. They're going to meet with me, where I've designated. The address is there, my phone number is there. The Calendly sends a confirm email after the meeting is set up. So it's very, very streamlined, the process of coordinating, getting together. And I found as I've used it, I was not meeting with a lot of wholesalers, or unless there was really a true need right then. And I realized a lot of that was because I did not like the back and forth. I didn't want to have an assistant have to talk to me or decide what on my calendar was really available and what wasn't. I know a lot of people get to that point where an assistant can manage the calendar. I'm not there yet. So again, this is another example of, think about in a traditional office environment, how much time and energy might be spent, going back and forth with people to schedule meetings. So again, that just like for $3,000 a year, you can have someone answer the phone. For $120 a year, you can kind of replace that function with a very streamlined, efficient process. And even the not so tech savvy, this is not a hard thing to do. It's very user friendly, large fonts, easy to click through and find availability. So I'm a big fan of Calendly so far. Here, another tool that you could begin using now when you're out and about and trying to link up with someone is called Glimpse, and that's GLYMPSE, Glimpse. Basically it's a temporary location sharing app. So if you are, meeting a client, meeting a friend, want to show your spouse that you're on the way home, or that you're still safe, you're traveling, on business, you can set up a glimpse to share your location for up to 4 hours at a time, and you can extend that before they expire. But it's very helpful if you want to let someone know you're making progress, you're on the way. If you've ever used Uber, it gives the person on the other end of your glimpse the same feeling of, okay, yeah, he's on his way, he's going to be here shortly, or he's not going to be here shortly. Before we moved, and I would sometimes hit traffic going home, I would send this to my wife, and she didn't find this interesting because we had two very small kids at the time. She was just interested in me getting home, so she didn't find it as exciting as I did. But theoretically, she would say, "Oh, okay, it also shows your speed. So okay, he's close by, but he's in traffic." That didn't really get her as excited as I thought it was. I thought it was pretty cool. It's a nice to have. If you're running particularly ahead or behind, I think it's very valuable. So Glimpse, you should be able to find them in the App Store, or just go to glimpse.com. That's GLYMPSE. The next tool that I use, again, this would probably be high on the list in terms of actual usage, is using the Chrome web browser. So if you use Internet Explorer for everything, if you've never tried the Google Chrome as a browser, I would highly recommend giving it a shot. I think Microsoft is probably caught up and is making everything more web-based, and even their Office is now a subscription instead of being a download. But Google was built for the kind of the online world, so that's where Chrome is built from the ground up this way. So my web browser using the internet, I use Chrome, and you have every little window, they call it a tab, is a different web page. And the 5 or 6 web pages I use all the time, if I close out of or leave a computer and go somewhere else, either I'm on my desktop, I go to my laptop. When I pull up my laptop and open Chrome, all the same tabs are there. So there's continuity. It's sort of in the cloud. There's continuity from one device to another. Same thing goes for your mobile devices. So even if you work in the same place, again, everything can be, all the settings and everything have continuity. If and when it's time for a new machine, you just log in and to Chrome, and boom, you're up and running. In fact, I found when I replaced my desktop and my laptop in the last year, there was really nothing to take off the old computer. It was just to delete, log out of everything, log out of all the apps, log out of Chrome, and wipe the machine clean anyways. But there was nothing left on the machine. Everything was sort of cloud-based, which makes it very easy to get up and running with a new machine. The setup time on my new computers was negligible. It was awesome compared to the previous experience of getting a new computer and having to move all the stuff over. Completely different, and I highly recommend starting to test that out if you haven't done it before. I think you'll find it's a lot more user friendly than you would expect. The next tool, and I guess the next to last one that I have here, is a service called Upwork. Up as in UP, Upwork. Again, like many of these, this is more about the type of tool than the specific resource. But Upwork is basically a freelancer community where you can find freelancers and virtual assistants to do projects for you or ongoing work. But I've used it more for projects at a very cost-effective rate. So in my case, I've listened to some content and read some stuff about virtual assistants, and I was looking for ways to accelerate certain research projects, and so I was able to create that's one more tool I can touch on. Create a screencast, a video of me doing some internet research to pull up information from publicly available sources like BrokerCheck or a firm's website, or just doing Google searches or LinkedIn. So, in this case, obviously the sensitive nature of our business, you can't have people accessing your firm systems without the correct authority and access granted by your firm. But in this case, these were just kind of research projects for publicly available data. So I just recorded the instructions, in a couple-minute video, and I'll touch on how to do that in a minute. And then hired someone for about $6 an hour in, I think, the Philippines, with detailed instructions. And I'd read a lot about Upwork. It used to be called Odesk and Elance. Odesk and Elance merged, and then they renamed themselves Upwork. In any event, I was able to get hours and hours of research at $6 an hour. So that's the kind of project where I probably wouldn't have ever done it in this particular case because it was so time intensive. And if I had, it would have been extremely expensive to pay, 2 or 3 times that or more for someone in the office. And as importantly, I don't necessarily think I would want someone spending that much time and energy and my money on this research project. So this is not the kind of thing where we're taking away American jobs. It's a job I would have never gotten done, but has become very valuable, and that allows my in-house staff or local staff, even if they're not in-house, so to speak, to focus on client-facing issues or more high-value high value work. So Upwork.com is a great resource. It takes a little getting used to the idea of interfacing with someone far away, but really, I found their skills are quite good, and it's no different than working with someone across town that you know very well in terms of the interface. Very good platform. They will do screenshots to show you that your person is actually working on your project, so you feel like you're getting your money's worth. And heck, at $6 an hour, I mean, there's a lot of room for a lot of wiggle room in there, even if they're not 100% efficient. But I found that it seems like I'm shocked how fast things can get done. I guess now the next to last tool, because I just had noted this one, but it's a great one. Some sort of screencasting tool or screen recording tool. I use screencastomatic.com. Screencastomatic, like automatic. And I find that it's very helpful because I can record a process very easily. Just hit record, and then I do whatever task on my computer, and then you can record your voice over it. And basically you can create sort of a training guide, either in, usually in little bits and pieces when you have activities or tasks that you're accomplishing. And as you do that, you save them, and all of a sudden here's your training manual. For example, if you're a solo advisor, but eventually you want to have an assistant, all you have to do, what I would recommend doing, is record your tasks that you do regularly, whether that's check your alerts or screen accounts a certain way or review accounts for any number of things, RMD management, or whatever your daily and weekly and recurring tasks are. If you record a video, even if you don't have an assistant yet, then when it's time, your time training and educating should be drastically less because you've already done it. You've shown them this is how you do it, instead of having to sit next to them and do it. Now, you still might have to answer questions, but again, if they need to watch it 6 times to get it, let your previous recorded self do it 6 times, not your live in-person self, spending your time on that. And the recording is you, and if you're doing the task anyways, the recording it part doesn't take long once you've got the software set up, which, like most of these tools, is not very hard to set up. I'm relatively impatient, as anyone who's worked with me can probably attest to. And so most of these tools, or if not all of them, are very easy to set up and use. Or if they're more difficult or take more time, they're worth the setup time. Like Google Voice, to get all the functionality, takes some getting used to, but it's well worth it. I've used it for 6.5 years. It's phenomenal. Some of these other tools are extremely simple to use. So if you've heard something that you think is valuable, test out that tool and let me know how it goes. And then the last, it's not as much of a tool, more of a resource, is our podcasts in general. So obviously I like podcasts. I've set one up. Thank you for listening. But I find all kinds of great knowledge and information across any topic you can imagine in the podcast world. So I generally listen on my iPhone through the Purple Podcast app. Purple being just the color of the app on the phone. So if you haven't gotten into podcasts, I'd encourage you to poke around and see what's there. Always come back to How to Go Independent, of course. But I think if you ever are driving or sitting doing work where you can afford to be listening to something, you can learn a lot instead of I can't listen to the radio anymore just because I feel like I'm missing an opportunity to learn something. So podcasts in general, I think, are an emerging trend. If nothing else, it's good for us to be familiar with them, just in terms of information delivery, so that when cars become ubiquitous with the Apple car platform with the podcast apps built in, it's good to at least be somewhat familiar with what that is and what that means. So in essence, all podcasts are audio recordings, and that's all they are. Nothing really fancy to it, but if you haven't listened to many, then I say check a few out and find something to either entertain yourself or to learn, or a combination of both. So it's been a big deal for me. Obviously, I've taken it to a little bit different level, creating my own, but just listening and consuming, I think, can be very valuable. And there you have it. Hope you enjoyed that laundry list of technology. Not always the most exciting thing, but if it helps us do our business better, faster, more efficiently, more effectively for our clients, streamline our life, make our lives easier, then, sometimes you have to invest the time to get to know these tools, but I found a lot of them have paid great dividends into the future. So that's all for now, and I will see you next time on How to Go Independent.